I'm Eric Long. I'm the rector here at St. John's, and what a joy it is to have you here. Thank you so much for coming out. I think you're going to be very, very glad that you are. This is this lecture series, the Dodson Lecture series. This is the 14th speaker that we've brought here. The Dodson family, Molly and Griff Dodson, endowed this series, and we've had people like Stanley Hauerwas and Walter Brueggemann, Fleming Rutledge, Nadia Bowles-Weber, just to name a few. And tonight we have David Zahl. And we are thrilled to have him here. And some of the Dodson family are here. Archer and Harriet Dodson, the Dodson girls, so to speak, are here. And Harriet's daughter, Mary Archer, as well. So welcome. I'm so thankful that you're here and for your family. So if you ever see me at the Y, you almost always see me listening to a podcast, and one of the things that I like to do and especially right now since my football team's not winning, so I don't want to listen to sports radio quite so much, is to listen to things that are edifying. And one of the places that I go is something called the Mocking Cast, and these couple of priests, RJ and Sarah, and their friend Dave, do this conversation just about the world about them, what they're reading, and how theology isn't some esoteric thing, but how it connects with the guts of life, and how their very life is a place of exploration for how God interacts in and through the world about them and their families and what they're going through and all the rest. And it's just this wonderful way for you to connect God and the things that seem at times, kind of remote from our lives, and they become intimate and just right there beside us. And so when we were thinking of a Dodson lecture, David Zahl just made tons of sense. David, has written great books, Seculosity, about how we've kind of replaced, the gospel with all kinds of other religious ways of being in the world, and they just don't satisfy. Something called low anthropology, which is kind of our perfectionism in the world, and how we just kind of have to have a more realistic view of ourselves, and that there's something of grace in that, which brings us to his latest book, The Big Relief, which is the urgency of grace in a world that very much needs grace, that doesn't have a whole lot of it at hand. And you're going to hear all about that. And one of the ways that we thought that we would, kind of introduce David is through his friend, a good friend of ours, Willis Logan, the Reverend Willis Logan. And so I'm going to turn this over to Willis, and he's going to more introduce Dave.
Hey, everybody. My name is Willis Logan, as Eric said, and I'm a minister at St. Mark's in Fincastle, and we're really just pleased to be a part of this evening. As Eric said, Dave is the founder and director of Mockingbird Ministries. I can be a salesman for Dave, and so that's mbird.com. And you can put it on your smartphone, and they take donations. It's an incredible ministry, though. It is a ministry that connects the never-changing message of Jesus's death and resurrection for us, the grace of God in our everyday lives. Just like Eric said, it's something that we all need to hear every day. Ministers need to hear it. Parishioners, the world needs to hear that message every day. And Dave and his team members deliver it through podcasts and a blog, conferences, and books. And Dave himself delivers it through his work. I had the privilege when I served in Charlottesville is being on staff with Dave and watching Dave as the college minister at Christ Episcopal Church minister to over 150 UVA kids every single year, bringing them the good news in small groups and through his teaching and lunches. And he just can articulate the gospel in our lives by looking at the world, by seeing the world through this incredible lens and bringing in where grace is at work or where there's the absence of. And so that was just my first introduction to Dave. And Dave has been a mentor of mine for preaching and just a dear friend. He's got 3 great boys, a lovely wife who's an incredible artist, and he still serves on the staff at Christ Church as an adult ed teacher. And tonight he's going to bring us something really special, which is the big relief. The relief for a worn-out world, this message of the gospel, the unconditional love given to us through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so what a treat it is. I tried to get Dave to move to Roanoke. We're working on that. But with this kind of turnout, this is pretty encouraging. So we're on our way. But what a treat it is to introduce my dear friend and all of our friends now, David Zahl.
Okay, how does that sound? Can everyone hear me all right? Gosh, thank you, Willis. It's such a joy to be here, to be back in Roanoke. The funny thing that I didn't see coming is that I've been on a book tour for this book for the last 4 months. This is the last of the speaking gigs I'm doing, so sort of hobbling into the finish line. Hopefully it won't feel that way. But the very first one I did was at Second Pres here in Roanoke, right across the street. So I saw George Anderson here tonight, so I guess Roanoke is like the spiritual home for this book. I didn't see it coming. But honestly, what better place to be? And, you know, the way to get into this material is to say that it could be a case of everything looking like a nail when you're holding a hammer. But as I was thinking about this book and thinking about how do I talk about grace in a contemporary setting in a way that's fresh and not hackneyed, this word relief, it kept popping up everywhere. I would hear it everywhere I went. And I didn't, you know, I was thinking just this last week or last month or so, I don't know if you've paid attention to what Hurricane Melissa did to Jamaica. But what's going on there is they're in need of disaster relief. When I was a kid, Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston, South Carolina. We needed relief. But that's just sort of one way in which we need relief. Asheville needs relief. Rolaids spells relief. You know, I was hoping that the book didn't sound like a big Rolaids commercial, but I guess there are worse things. How else are we looking for relief? This is I thought this was interesting. People are very full of anxiety these days, and if you are a person who likes to color, I've been told that that's one mode of relief. Then there is comic relief. If you follow pretty much any Pixar film or any Disney film, there's always what? There's always the comic relief character who's there to crack jokes. My favorite is the dog, Doug from Up, who goes, squirrel, squirrel, you know, because I have a little terrier, and she is very much that way. Right as the book was coming out, this is Amy Poehler, who is the star of a show called Parks and Recreation. It's now off the air, but she's a famous actress and comedian. And she has a new podcast out called A Good Hang with Amy Poehler. And this, I think the week after the book came out, this episode aired where she's talking to Rashida Jones. Rashida Jones is the daughter of Quincy Jones, who produced much of Frank Sinatra's output, also produced much of Michael Jackson's output, We Are the World, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Anyhow, his daughter, Rashida, is an accomplished actress herself, and this was what happened at the end of this episode.
And then the last question, good hang. So we're trying to figure out how to continually self-regulate here and find joy in all different places. And I'm asking everybody to talk about what gives them relief. What is the thing they go to and they want to laugh, check out, tune in, take a load off. It's small or big, but I feel we learn a lot about somebody by what they laugh at. What's yours?
Well, contrary to what we just talked about, which is
Yeah.
I love good music, and I love, I love the emotionality of listening to great music. Nothing makes me laugh harder than really confident, really bad singing. like sincerely confident bad singing.
It's a great answer to the question, where do you look for relief? What's so great about this, the reason I show it to you, is not only because I think it's a pretty good podcast, but her question is not, are you in need of relief, but where are you looking for relief? It's not a question of if you need relief. To be a person alive in 2025 is to crave a little room to breathe. I mean, we're about to enter what do they call it? The December rush is just absurd, but we're about to do Thanksgiving before that. So maybe you need relief before that even begins. My wife and I figured out exactly what relief looks like for people in our stage of life. And what relief looks like is a very intense rainstorm in the hours of 2 to 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning. 2 to 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Why is that relief? Because it means you wake up, the sun is shining, but every game is canceled. So you are high on canceled plans. I have 3 boys, 15, 13, and 9, and so our Saturdays are like a military operation. You go to mountain biking here, I'll go to soccer there, and by the way, we have a birthday party, we have a youth group event, and they happen to somehow always be at opposite ends of not just the city, but the county of Albemarle County. So when that happens, we feel like we're playing hooky, and we are very, very happy that we have a full day ahead of us, but we can be outside, we don't have to be cooped up. That's what relief looks like for us. So, when we're talking about what are we craving relief from, this is the great question, and it varies according to person and location and time of life. It could be relief from the punishing travel sports schedules that we feel locked into, but it could be relief from the treadmill of professional and financial and relational demand that seems to get faster every single year. When I log in to pay my mortgage, there's this little button now that says, "Are you interested in mortgage payment relief?" And I think, of course I'm interested in mortgage payment relief, but I don't think you guys are going to give it to me. I've been hoodwinked before, and I'm not going to fall for it again. But perhaps you would like a little relief from the rancor of the headlines and our political discourse, the culture wars. Maybe it's something more existential that you're looking for relief from, like the pressure to be a certain kind of person or to demonstrate that you're worthy of the air you breathe. Maybe you long for relief from guilt or grief or loneliness, or like the Rolaids people, you're looking for relief from pain. I gave a version of this talk in Florida a couple weeks ago. And I asked them what they were looking for relief from, and everyone had something related to joints. It was like, I was like, well, I was hoping to get a little deeper than that, but okay, the joints are terrible. God didn't know what was going on there. It could be all the above. I don't know what it is for you, but I know it's something. The world is a pressure cooker, and that pressure wears us out. It wears us out. Relief refers to the feeling of pressure being removed. That's why there's a bench on the cover of this book. It's not the most exciting cover. I was worried that it really was quite a boring cover. A bench is just not that appealing of an image unless you've been standing all day, right? Unless you've been on your feet for ages and you feel like you need to sit down. Then, that's why they sold me on the cover. So relief connotes, it's not always deflation, it's a sense of removal and respite, like taking off a heavy backpack, tired muscles being given a break. Relief connotes ease and freedom. In the case of people in Asheville or Jamaica, relief connotes deliverance, help. Everyone I know is craving and chasing relief. The question is merely what you want relief from and where you're going for it. The tragedy is that most of us don't choose as well as Rashida. Now, surely people turn to God in search of relief. I'm told, and I see us experiencing a bit of a reversal in that respect, that people are looking to God again in a kind of a more urgent way. The purposelessness of replacement religion has worn people out in new ways. There's a disillusionment there. And I feel like there's a little bit more openness to going back to church. And yet, sadly, as we know, the God of Christianity doesn't always signal relief. The church is seen and very often experienced as a purveyor of spiritual and moral burdens, rather than as a safe place to unload those burdens. In such circumstances, religion can feel less like a place to seek refuge and more than a system to seek refuge from. So why? This book is attempting to answer the question, why do some of us experience Christianity or our faith as a burden and others as relief? The answer, I'm convinced, has to do with grace. When grace is present and central, the Christian faith serves as an engine of love and hope and reconciliation and even creativity. But when grace is muted or absent, faith turns into a project and then a burden and sometimes a weapon. So what is grace? Different people mean different things by it. A ballerina means something different than a 9-year-old about to, eat some pizza. We got to say grace first. Baptist means something different than Roman Catholics. I like how large the word is. I like how expansive it is. I like how much weight it can bear and how it seems to continually be something good. Here are a few definitions, though, that might help us. Grace is a gift with no strings attached. That's really going straight from the New Testament. Grace, I had a psychologist who was married to a famous theologian. I had she in my 20s, and she defined grace as non-contingent, compassionate alliance. I love that. That's beautiful. When I was a youth minister in my 20s, we always talked about grace as unmerited favor. And I like that definition because the meritocracy is brutal and rejection stinks. So unmerited favor sounds pretty great. But what about unwarranted generosity? The Les Mis, the musical based on Victor Hugo's book, the touring production went to Richmond about a few months ago. I don't know if you got to see it, but my wife and child went to it. I am still nursing a resentment that they went without me because I love that musical. And if you know the book, if you know the musical, if you know the movie with Anne Hathaway and Russell Crowe, you know that it hinges on an act of unwarranted generosity. The grace that turns the whole plot is when the bishop gives the silver to Jean Valjean. Unwarranted generosity. A sacrificial love that seeks a person out at their most unlovable. I think that's a workable definition. I also like grace as a positive, surprising interruption to the quid pro quo, the this for that informs most of our relationships. Theologically speaking, grace is the answer the Bible gives to the question of God's disposition toward troubled people like you and me. This answer is revealed in and inextricably tied to the person and work of Jesus Christ. Paul says in Romans 5, but God proves his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now, what does that have to do with hurts? Thanks for asking. Philip Yancey wrote a wonderful book in the late 90s called What's So Amazing About Grace. This book is an attempt to sort of condense, update, and sort of maybe provide a fresh spin on that book. And he tells a story at the beginning of the book. He says, I remember once getting stuck in Los Angeles traffic and arriving 58 minutes late at the Hertz rental desk. I walked up in kind of a bad mood, put the keys down and said, how much do I owe? The woman says, nothing. You're all clear. I said I was late. And she smiled and said, yes, but there's a 1-hour grace period. So I asked, oh, really? What is grace? And she said, I don't know. I guess it means that even though you're supposed to pay, you don't have to. That's a good start to a definition. Now, in the parlance of this book, grace is the big relief at the heart of the Christian faith. It is the most important, most urgent, most radical contribution that Christianity has to make to the life of the world, to your life, and to mine. There may be more to the way of Jesus than consolation, but there's never less than that. Grace is the emotional engine of the entire works. It is the too good to be trueness at the heart of God. Moreover, grace exists in relief against the way the world usually works. See what I did there, right? You like that? I thought it was funny. Or at least the way we presume the way the world works, which uses usually some form of conditionality or chaos. You get what you deserve, no more, no less. Well, a few years ago, a theologian named John Barclay, English guy, wrote a doorstop of a book called Paul and the Gift, in which he attempted to trace the contours of grace in the New Testament letters of St. Paul. And what he explained is that what we translate as grace was for Paul and his first century readers the very normal word they used for gift. So when Paul talks about the grace of God, he is in large part talking about the gift of God, how and what God gives and to whom. Barclay maintains that this understanding of gift we find in Paul's letters differed from the gift-giving norms of that time and any time in several important ways. I'm just going to talk about 3 of them quickly. For starters, God's grace is incongruous, which means the relation in question is out of whack. I have a 7th grader going through geometry right now, and the last time I used the word congruent or incongruous was in relation to right angles and, parallelograms. Right? Homework is a struggle. However, what you find is that a shape has congruent sides if they match. And so to say that God's grace is incongruous means that the size and value of the gift does not match the worthiness of the recipient. It's not indexed to the recipient's life in any way, and therein lies its miraculousness. God does not give to the worthy, but the unworthy. No deserving. I thought that a great way to illustrate this, if anyone knows Billy Collins, we're going to listen to a poem that he reads called The Lanyard.
So, The Lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more suddenly into the past, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even.
Isn't that wonderful? So love in Colin's poem is portrayed as fundamentally incongruous. It operates outside the bounds of proportionality and circular exchange. And the exchange, to the extent it exists at all, is cast by Collins as an absurdity, played for laughs and yet still undiminished in its core sweetness. The mom gives her son everything, not just love, but life itself. And in return, he gives her, I think all 3 of my sons made them this summer. But God's grace not only defies our sense of proportion, it defies predictable timing as well. God, in Paul's telling, doesn't give in response to human overtures. He doesn't show grace after we've exhibited proper deference and humility. No, God gives first. This was certainly the case in Paul's own life, when God knocked him off his horse while on the way to Damascus to persecute Christians. And Barclay refers to this attribute as the priority of grace. God takes the first step, lavishing his gift on antagonistic men and women before they can prove themselves worthy. Now, a third defining attribute of God's grace, according to John Barclay, has to do with what he terms its superabundance. This refers to the scale of the gift. God does not hold back, but exceeds the spending limit by leaps and bounds. There's something overflowing, something maximal, mind-bogglingly maximal about the way that God gives. So God's grace, as revealed in Jesus Christ, is not tied to any human criterion of worth. If anything, God inverts our precious hierarchy of deserving, giving superabundant attention, approval, and love, his very self, to the wrong sort of people. Now, that is mainly what the book is trying to get across. But I want to talk just briefly before telling you a story. I want to talk about how grace also spells relief from despair. If I could write an extra chapter for this book, it would be about despair. I spoke with a colleague recently about ministry to college students. Willis noted that I worked for 12 years as our undergraduate minister at Christ Church in Charlottesville, so a lot of UVA kids over the years. But I also had a lot of colleagues, people at other churches and parachurch ministries who were working with that same age group. So I had breakfast actually, with a guy who's still in the middle of that work. And he made a startling observation, but one which I instantly realized had the air of truth. 15 years ago, he said, when a young man would approach him to speak about a personal pastoral matter, 9 out of 10 times, it would be something related to purity, something related to dating. Today, or possibly sort of things he shouldn't be looking at. Today, when a young man asks to bend his ear about something personal, odds are he's about to disclose a mental health emergency, usually some form of suicidal ideation. I know this is a heavy thing to talk about on a Thursday night, but nearly everyone I know who's engaged in pastoral ministry, I know a lot of people in this field, would corroborate this. I don't know a single church of any denomination that hasn't witnessed an uptick in funerals where the cause of death was despair-related. More and more people would rather not live. Plenty of others are barely hanging on. Indeed, this book was written in large part to address this despair, which is what I consider to be the most acute spiritual condition of our day. I know of no more potent force or idea or reality or doctrine when it comes to allaying despair than the grace of God. But before I talk about how it does that, what is despair? Well, despair usually entails an alarming confidence about future doom. To be in true despair is to be certain that the emptiness or darkness that surrounds you now will always surround you. The way things are presently is how they will always be. There's not even hope, there's no hope of hope. You might say despair is the confidence that there are no pieces on the chessboard of life other than the ones you can see and manipulate. Which, if you've made a mess of your life or suffered some terrible setback, or both, can be a very grim prospect. A person in despair is captive to what I would call a collapsed horizon of possibility. You can only see this. But the grace of God means that the horizon of possibility is never actually fixed. Not only are there pieces on the chessboard that we cannot see from our perspective, some of those pieces are beneficent. There are redemptive forces at work beyond our ability to see, summon, or control them, which include a God who forgives, who loves, who redeems, who brings life out of death. A God who possesses power that you do not. The possibilities for our life, in other words, are not restricted to what you and I can effort into existence, any more than it is dictated by what we've done or left undone, even who we are. Let's look at the Bible quickly. John chapter 5. This is Jesus has just entered Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath. Just one more word of context here. According to tradition, where this pool was located, an angel would come and stir the waters, and the first person into the waters would be healed. And so naturally, it's where the sick congregated. So Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and he doesn't go to the palace, he goes to the hospital. And once he's there, he finds the person who's been there the longest, the most chronic sufferer, 38 years, longer than a lot of the life expectancy at that time. This man would have been seen as unhealable. We're not exactly sure what ails him. Presumably he has trouble moving. This is a painting of this scene by Carl Bloch, the Danish painter. I think it's 1870s. Jesus looks curiously Danish. Now, I'll tell you why I love this painting, but what we learn from their exchange is that the invalid's sickness is more than just physical. He's suffered not just corporal pain, but emotional pain. He's been pushed aside, he's been overlooked, no relief in sight. You'll notice that he doesn't answer Christ's question. He gives an excuse. He recites a script. He is a man full of self-pity. And I say that as a person with a black belt in self-pity. Okay? So my wife tells me, I am very good at turning everything into a woe is me narrative. There's a little bit of bitterness, in fact, in his response. He's become attached to his despair. He's given up on relief. Doesn't mean there aren't pitiable things that have occurred, clearly. But it means he has blocked out anything that might threaten his identity. That's why I love this covering, what looks like a burlap sack. It shows the despair that the man is in. He literally cannot see the light. He can only see this tiny, tiny thing in front of him. He's camped out there. It looks like he's really made himself comfortable. He wants to be there for the long haul. Moreover, he's convinced that there's one thing that needs to happen for him to be made well. He's married to a very specific prescription vis-a-vis him getting better. In this case, the solution he's married to is something that he needs to do. He needs to get in that pool. He holds the key, he just can't reach the keyhole. He cannot heal himself. Well, the good news here is that while you and I are put off by self-pity and obstinance, Jesus is not. He understands that sick people balk at healing, that is part of our sickness. And instead, he comes to this man in his despair, in the place of unhealability. He peels back the curtain with gracious intent, and he punctures the cocoon of despair to which this man has retreated in his pain. You'll notice that Jesus does not require the right response. There's no prerequisite for the healing. The solution does not lie in something the man has to do or some work of the law. In fact, Jesus heals him on the Sabbath in order to make it very plain that the relief he represents is somehow transcends the rules. At the very least, it is not a you do this and I do that scenario. Christ does not relate to him on the basis of what he brings to the table, but on the basis of who he, Jesus, is. This is incongruous in the extreme. It's prior, it's superabundant, and it's external. It's also not a matter of the man's willpower or deserving. It's simply a matter of his being there. Now, I want to tell a story that illustrates this in non-first century terms, and then maybe if people have questions, we can talk for a sec. This is a story that appeared in the Boston Globe 2 weeks ago on Veterans Day. And it is the story of this man. It's a man named Ed Kochanowski. The story is about two Marines in the Vietnam War. These are guys who'd grown up just a few miles away from each other. Ed Kochanowski here is from South Boston, Southie. He came from a broken home. His fellow Marine was a man named Paul Grasso from Quincy, right next door. It's Southie with trees. That's how it's known. That's not my epithet. Paul Grasso is the youngest of 5 children in a loving Italian family. These men connected after they enlisted, and they became fast friends and part of the same unit. They had each other's back. Now, in the spring of 1968, Ed and Paul were outside Khe Sanh, where the fighting was intense. They were on patrol, fording a stream, when the strap on the mortar pack that Ed was carrying broke. He happened to be waist deep in water at the time, grasping at the broken strap to keep the mortars dry, as Paul mounted a steep, muddy bank ahead of him. Paul has his friends, he sees what's going on. He turns back, he sees Ed struggling in the water. And so with one hand on the broken strap, Ed reaches out, he's in the water, with his M16, so that Paul could use it to pull him out of the water. Are you with me? Which Paul does. And as Ed was almost at the top of the bank, A shot rang out. Paul fell, gravely wounded. Paul died on that riverbank 20 days short of his 20th birthday. Ed was devastated. They took away his weapons because they didn't want him to hurt himself. They sent him home, back to Boston. While he was recovering in a military hospital, he got bad news from Vietnam just after he left. 5 of the 10 guys in his unit had gotten killed in a firefight. His survivor's guilt worsened. He was diagnosed with what we now call PTSD. The guilt felt like a heavy, wet blanket on his shoulders. His chest was always tight, sometimes making it hard to breathe. No relief. No relief. He began drinking to make the pain go away, but that only made his depression worse. Not long after returning home, Ed married. His wife was wonderful, but he was not. He was consumed by booze and demons. Ed said to the reporter reporting the story, said, "It was 10 of 12 years of that. I got into car accidents twice. They used the jaws of life to extract me from a car." Well, after his first marriage ended, Ed met a woman named Dottie at the Polish American Citizens Club. They married. She was the love of his life. And yet he almost threw it away because what happened in Vietnam kept gnawing at him. At his lowest point, he turned to God and said, "Lord, if you're there, I've been looking for you a long time." Then he found a passage in the Bible where Jesus is talking to the Pharisee named Nicodemus. And Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they're born again." In that moment, in a dream that didn't seem like a dream, Ed felt a rush of wind and he was born again. He began reading more about the phenomenon and learned that his mother's name, Renata, is derived from the Latin renatus, which means born again. He discovered his surname, Kochanowski, means to love in Polish. That was 45 years ago, Ed said. I got right with God and Jesus, and I got right with my family. I put my marriage back together. My kids warmed up to me. If it wasn't for Jesus, I would have died a long time ago. Jesus did for Ed what he couldn't do for himself, and that is relief. That is grace. Meanwhile, though, the Grasso's life was quite different. Instead of being anchored by guilt, they were anchored by grief. Their pain was compounded by the dearth of information from the Marines and the government about the circumstances surrounding Paul's death. Paul's older brother, Ray, said, "That lack of closure became its own kind of pain. I carried it through my whole life like a weight strapped to my back. The grief never faded. It just got quieter. No relief." On the first Memorial Day after Paul was killed, Ed guessed correctly that Paul's family would go to his grave. And so he went to the cemetery too, but lingered in the distance. He couldn't bring himself to approach them. Another time, when they were dedicating a memorial to Paul Grasso in Quincy, Ed went to the cemetery. He stood in the crowd, again trying to summon the courage to approach the Grassos, but he just couldn't. The guilt was too heavy. It was continuing to eat him up. He just couldn't take those last steps, make that awkward introduction, and throw himself at the mercy of the Grasso family. This past summer, Ray Grasso's daughter, Amy, borrowed her father's van to move her family into a new home. Along the way, the van got dented, and Amy offered to pay for the repairs. She told her dad to bring the van to Chuck Ayer's auto body shop in North Quincy. So Ray Grasso gets in the van. He makes the short drive to get a quote, handing his registration to the guy behind the counter. And that guy, Ed Kochanowski, recognized the name immediately. Kochanowski drew a breath and swallowed hard before addressing Ray Grasso. "Did you have a brother who was a Marine that was killed in Vietnam 57 years ago?" Taken aback, Ray Grasso replied, almost in a whisper, "Yes." "I think we need to step outside," Ed said. Outside, Ed looked at him and said, "It was me. I'm the one." Ray understood immediately. Both men began sobbing, folding into each other. After a bit, Ray pulled back and said, "I want you to know, I hold nothing against you. We never blamed you. Never." Now that is a moment of profound relief and grace. After it was out there in the open for everyone to digest, so much became clearer. After hearing Ed's heartfelt words, I knew one thing, Ray said. This man didn't need more punishment. He needed peace. The Grassos gave him that in spades. That's Ray and Ed at his brother's grave. The weight those men had carried, one for knowing what had happened, the other for not knowing, the pressure it had exerted on their entire lives, disappeared into the ether. Kochanowski is now an adopted member of the Grasso family, the kind he wished for when he was a boy. He's a frequent guest at the Grasso home where Ray's wife, Susan, fusses over him. Their daughter, Tara, is a hairdresser, and she cuts Ed's hair. Susan Grasso said that Ed coming into their lives has closed a circle, put an end to something that had eaten away at their family. He gave them a gift, explaining how Paul died as he lived, selflessly, trying to help someone who needed it, to provide relief. For his part, Ed Kochanowski said that the continuing, loving embrace of the Grasso family has healed him, ended his war, and finished an odyssey that began when a clueless kid from Southie was sent off to a foreign land. That's what the big relief looks like. That's an echo of the big relief. That is not a story about willpower or human ingenuity. It is a story of God doing for these men what they could not do for themselves, for relieving them of the burdens they carried. And where that burden was is now love, connection, and a grace that seems to pour out of them toward the rest of their community. That's what it looks like for grace to exist in a graceless world. It breaks in, and it does so despite our inability to summon it or say the right words. This is good news, and it's not just good news for Vietnam veterans. It's good news for you too. And that's really all I have to say. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much for Dave for that and for sharing and being here. Thank you to you all for coming as well. Before I forget, we'll do a few question and answers, possibly. Please stay after. As you can tell, there's a reception following the event, and we'd love for you to stay and a little chance to interact with Dave. Hopefully interact with each other after hearing all that, and then also if you'd be interested in buying a book and Dave signing it, there's that as well. Yeah, we'll take a few questions. I always joke when I get into situations like this, I was like, please don't make a statement disguised as a question, right? Kind of come up with a well thought out, short question. We'd love to take a few of those and interact. Dave would love to interact with you on that, and I'll kind of help facilitate that if someone has something they'd like to sort of chat about that wonderful talk. Otherwise, we'll just stand here awkwardly and look at each other, you and I, Dave, and wait for that moment. Does anybody have a question or a thought that they'd like to share? Said it all.
That's okay too. Oh, you got one right here?
Yes.
I do not have a question, but I just want to tell you that I agree with you.
Thank you.
It's a lot to hear somebody else say that.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. We think that people will be changed by shame or dictate or force. And the truth is the great change agents in life, I think, are usually some either desperation or love in the midst of desperation, which is another euphemism for, guess what? Grace.
Any other thoughts or a question? Oh, you're waving at people. I wasn't sure.
As somebody who, as I said, loves your work, I just kind of, it was asked of me earlier how you discerned that this was what your life was going to be, which I consider to be a grace in the world, or at least my workouts, which I hate.
How did I discern it?
Yeah, this is what you would do with your life.
I didn't. I think life is mostly understood backwards. I felt like I had a passion and interest to talk about grace and the love of God in a way that felt creative, right at the time that the internet was sort of becoming a thing. And all of a sudden you look back and you're like, oh my goodness, we started up a platform. And God opened these doors. But there was never any plan. So I think most people look back on their life and what was that all about? But I'm grateful. It's much cooler and more interesting than anything I could have devised. So I think God's grace has been evident to me in the work of Mockingbird, because it's when we first started it, we were talking about ministry and talking about the gospel online, and you'd talk to churches, you'd be asking their missions budget, to give some money, and they'd be like, that's what, the internet is not a place where ministry happens. And I don't think anyone feels that way anymore. So, for us it's been one step of faith after another, oftentimes looking foolishly, but God always meeting us. And we've never been bored. And there's always been a next thing to do. And I'm really, really grateful for that. By the way, I was told when I was in boarding school as a junior that I wasn't allowed to get into the honors English class. And so I never thought of myself as a writer. I took that verdict to heart. And so writing was just something I did in my sort of as a fun thing, because I wasn't good at it. And so God had the last laugh on that one too. So maybe that gave me some freedom to actually take some risks. I don't know.
Yeah, Allison?
How did you all come up with the name Mockingbird?
Sure, thanks for asking. Mockingbird, the idea is that we are repeating the song we've heard, which is the song of God's grace and forgiveness, the gospel. And we're doing it like a mockingbird does. That the Christian, the non-Christian, we never graduate from our need to hear about the basic message of God's grace. And so we're trying to repeat it in every way and every key we know how, hopefully not in an irritating way, but that's where the name comes from.
Andy? Yeah.
I have a very simple question.
Okay,
And it's well thought out too, David.
good. I wanted to make sure.
Credit cards at the desk back there.
Yes.
We take credit cards, we take Apple Pay. I have
Yes,
no
that's right.
cash to give change, but
George, you have a question? Well, I've heard it's an apocryphal story, but I think it's an important one. That, suicides in the medieval world were damned, and they were not allowed to be buried in Christian graveyards. And the apocryphal story about Martin Luther is that there was a child of a family in his congregation who took his own life. And he took the boy's body and buried it in the churchyard and said, this boy was overcome by robbers in the woods. That there is such a thing that they're someone who is assaulted by that which is stronger than they are. And that God's mercy extends
to them, at least the God that Luther was betting his life on, was a God who was not capricious or cruel, but on the side of those who had been defeated. So that might be called comfort to someone who knows. We have a suicide support group at our church because this has touched so many lives locally, and I don't know if there's ever a why or a sort of a theological mechanic that you can elucidate and someone feels better. It's much more just a chance to sit and to experience the grace of other people just being there when you're hurting. As far as what it means for the loss, there's God. If an answer would help, God would have given one, I think. Instead, he gave us his son, so who knows a thing or two about pain and abandonment.
Yeah, Richard?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to frame this. I hear you be saying, and I am aware of this, that God often acts in ways that surprise us in this graceful way. God's the actor. What part do we have to play in this movement of grace and even noticing it and acting on it?
Oh, that's a great question. I used to have strong feelings about that question, and I think that God, that human-divine tango happens in all sorts of ways. I know that for the person who's struck down by addiction and cannot seem to contribute meaningfully to their relationship with God, that God is, I see, the rooms of recovery are filled with people who would say that I did nothing except for admit helplessness. But then I've seen Christians who have cultivate disciplines over the years and going to church and somehow love God in a what feels like a non-self-righteous way. And so I don't want to ever tear that down. But the hope that I have is I want there to be hope for the folks that have been handcuffed by circumstance, by genetics, by their past, by trauma, etc., by sin, by the devil. And I see that's where I see God's grace most come alive. But I wouldn't want to dictate it in some way that turns it into a new law or new formula. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but it seems like what Ed Kochanowski contributed was desperation. He turned to God, and then he contributed resistance, and he did not contribute courage, and yet God was still present in that. I don't think that's an excuse to never, put one foot in front of the other. So there's something a little bit mysterious that goes on here. But I know that when we make grace into do this in order to receive God's grace, then you've just taken with one hand what you've given with the other. So.
Thank you. Ruth, Ruth, do you have a question?
I feel like my question was similar to where Richard's going, but so I've also listened to the podcast on Eric's recommendation, and a few weeks ago you all talked about, so if you are a person who gives yourself grace, right, and hopefully also gives grace to other people and accepts God's grace, how then do you also motivate yourself to do the right thing or to encourage someone else, when they're in their time of desperation in a way that's meaningful? And I really appreciated the conversation, but could use like a reminder of what you all talked about, and I think that that's a big, part of what's hard right now, to not just sit back and just sort of let it all be a
Yeah. How do we see an increase of grace in the world that starts with us, kind of thing? Is that what I'm hearing? I feel that we love because he first loved us. And so that anytime we move away from the wellspring, which is God, the batteries are going to run dry real fast. That doesn't mean that they might not run for a little while. But prior belovedness is the engine of sacrificial love in the world, that, as far as I can tell. That and the Holy Spirit just doing crazy things that are beyond our capacity to engineer or really even understand. So I always feel that if you're struggling to show someone grace, you remember that you are not God. It might be beyond your power to be kind to this person that hurts you so badly. And you can say, God, you're going to have to deal with this person. But to the extent that you can remember that somehow you are that person for someone else, that sometimes can break up the frozen sea inside. And I think that's one of the reasons why we go to church, by the way, every week. It's not just to sort of kneel and stand and recite words. Like there's meaning. There's what we're reminded of week after week, especially if you're coming to this church and you're celebrating communion. You're hearing about God who's broken for you, whose blood was shed for you. I mean, we don't graduate from that. We need it every week, every 7 days, probably more than that. So that's a gift that keeps on giving, I think, a wellspring.
Yeah, we probably have time for one more if there is one. Oh, Alan?
Worse and worse, and that's kind of where her mind is now. There's no hope for hope. And it's some kind of, it's trying to find the words sometimes to say something encouraging. It just seems like it's really hard. I like that definition of despair. No hope. No hope for hope.
And sometimes a person in that situation does need to feel understood and not just yelled at to have more hope. That's how they'll receive it sometimes. It's just be like, okay, you not only have no hope, you have no hope of having hope. To be understood in that can be a form of grace, I think. And also, we're talking about suicide. I don't want to presume to deny that there are physiological elements to these, to mental illness and mental sickness. And sometimes our hope is in the resurrection of the dead. And that's what we're also talking about. That not even death is the end of the story, is when you're thinking of Christianity, which is something, sometimes Episcopalians get a little bashful about. But that's what's going on here.
Good, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we live very much in a world that sort of seems stripped of grace at times. So if nothing else, I hope you take many things from this. But I do think, take that. There's definitely a shortage of grace to go around. I mean, we see it around us every day. And so any sort of remembrance of that and dwelling on that to offer that grace, love, those things to other people can only help you, help them, help everybody. So it's a wonderful remembrance. So again, thank you to Dave Zahl for his time. Appreciate that. And thanks, Dave. Yeah, go ahead. And I do hope you don't. I mean, if you have to go. But stick around, talk to some people you don't know. There's a big reception. They'll open the doors up here and have some time to share it and be together. So thank you very much, everyone.